Curious how you address the technical access issues for the online or the online portions of the trial.
Right. So what we've done in Texas is we are just literally delivering to their homes devices that connect. They're locked down, but they're basically, in most instances, iPads with cell service. They're locked down where the only thing that is on it able to be used is Zoom, which is what we're using in our state, as well as a Dropbox to view the exhibits. That's pretty much it. They can't, and that was locked down to try to prohibit them from doing other research. They obviously have cameras so we can watch them the whole time. They've been totally engaged in all the trials that we've watched and done. And like I said, next week there's 4. You can go watch them for yourself. There's a link you can go to, streams.txcourts.gov, and you can watch all of the courts live next week. But you can see for yourself how you feel about it. But that's how we've dealt with the barrier. We ask folks as part of the jury summons questioning process, do you have the device? Do you have a private room? And we're either delivering them a device, or if they don't have a private place, they can appear at the courthouse into a Zoom room where they are able to participate remotely from the courthouse.
And one of the things I was concerned about was how would we be providing, jury instructions to the jurors? How would we provide them their exhibits? How would we provide them their verdict form? And more importantly, how would I get it back? How would I get back that executed, signed verdict form in a timely basis? So one of the other questions I asked the jurors was whether they had the ability to fax, for instance, from home, if they ended up being a 4-person. Or did they, alternatively, not as good an alternative was if they had a smartphone, they could take a photograph, say, of the verdict form, the executed verdict form, and then somehow email it or text it to the court. So we discussed that. But then finally, what it turned out is that the person who ended up being the 4 persons chosen by the jurors when they were initially deliberating remotely, indicated that she actually would be able to come to court. It wasn't far from her. She would be willing to do so. And so that actually turned out to be a really excellent result, because many of the concerns I had about getting about the jury being able to communicate to the court during deliberations was really erased at that point. We had a 4-person who was physically able to, we put her in her own room with a laptop, and she was physically able to, email the clerk or even just walk over and knock on the door and say, I've got a question to present to the jury, to present to the court from the jury, or we've come to a verdict and here's the verdict form. So we ended up having all of our jurors deliberate remotely, including the 4-person, because she brought her laptop into court and deliberate with them remotely as if she were at home, but also had the advantage of having her present just in case we needed to have sort of immediate communications with the jury and not have to worry about how we were going to be able to communicate with them. So that all worked out really well. What we did do, though, when we sent in verdict forms and so forth, is we emailed each of the jurors individually with a packet which had the jury instructions, which I read to them, and which had the verdict forms, their own verdict forms, which they could be filling out and keeping track and monitoring their vote. And then also the exhibits were emailed to them individually. And in that regard, we had to do it individually. In other words, we did not do a group email because we did not want them to have emails to share with each other. So that took a little bit of time, and that took a little bit extra time, but it worked out perfectly. It was really very advantageous to have our 4-person in court with us. I did have to issue a set of additional instructions, about 10 instructions, to remind jurors that they were to conduct themselves as if they were in court, that they were to make sure that they, when they were in the room deliberating, that there would be nobody else in the room, that they would not be doing anything else in the room, any other taking care, even taking care of a pet, no pets, and that they, whenever they took a break, I reminded them that that everybody then had to take a break and they could not discuss the case unless all 12. I mean, it's the same kind of issues you have actually in person, right? And to remind them of that. You just don't have your court attendant perhaps outside the door, who they could contact and waiting for them. But honestly, I mean, inside the deliberation room, we don't know what's going on there, right? We just assume, and I think assume correctly, that they will follow the court's instructions with respect to maintaining their privacy, also not, and breaking when they break, and there may be still some people in the deliberation room that they do not discuss the case among each other until all 12 are there. So I did give a number of additional instructions in that regard. One of the other things is the exhibits. When we sent over the exhibits, we needed to remind jurors not to be not to be reviewing any of those exhibits and other forms that they were getting unless they were in deliberations, so that they couldn't do that. And then we just have to trust them in that regard.
At a certain point, you have to assume that the jurors are taking their oath seriously. There's always a risk at even an in-person trial that two jurors could go out to lunch and talk about the trial during the trial when they know they're not supposed to, or go home after day one of deliberations and discuss the case with their spouse. Those are things that you just can't control unless we want to go back to a system of sequestering the entire jury for the entire trial and tightly controlling it in that way. And I just don't think that's realistic. That's why they're under oath, and that's what they need to do. And I think in our case, I noticed during the testimony, during closing, a lot of the jurors were wearing headsets. You could tell that they were engaged in what was going on because while you can't necessarily see the entire room, you can see a lot closer up version of their face than you would in the courtroom. And so you can see a level of engagement that you might not see if somebody's in the jury box with their eyes opened, turned towards you, but totally zoned out, making their grocery list in their head. So it's a trade-off, but I think in our case, the judge was careful to instruct that here's what's expected of you, and it hasn't changed because we're over Zoom, and we expect you to be in the room by yourself, listening to the testimony by yourself, and coming into deliberations, deliberating just in the jury room and just with the jurors. And I appreciate that there are challenges, but I think there are challenges with in-person trials as well.
How the county works in that regard, and your jury commissioner. And in our case, it requires, it just takes a lot longer. It requires a jury. So we would say, we've told all of our judges who are doing remote cases, you need to add time to your trials. Mostly up front, mostly in the jury selection process, you need to add time. And the other thing I do in my cases, because they are the type they are, I have a lot of other cases on the calendar. I do Monday through Thursday, 8:30 to 1:30, no lunch, 2 15-minute breaks. That's it. So it's a shorter day. It's a half day, but I actually think in a remote case, in a remote trials, it actually is a better way to go. I don't know if you can hold on to a juror's attention easily all the way through a full day, number one. And number two, you will have more technical issues come up. As the longer you're online, the more likely you're going to have some problem with a technical breakdown where a juror's lost and you have to put them up again. So even though it was 55 days, it was really closer to 30 days in trial, and it was a shortened day.
So for our in-person trials, which is part of our hybrid process for criminal and some civil trials, the court day is about the same. And the reality is that we need a certain amount of time. So we don't, for those in-person trials, we don't have those kind of half-day sessions that Judge Drummond was talking about. And even on our Zoom trials, we're very aware of the fact that sometimes the jurors may have those child care issues or other issues. We try to take account of that, but the reality is if we have to stop, then that lengthens the total time of the trial. One of the observations that I would have doing a lot of pure Zoom bench trials, as well as now both hybrid and pure Zoom jury trials, is that different parts take different amounts of time when you convert from in-person to video. And the reality is sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer. And it doesn't always wash out, but frequently it does. And those technology issues, oh my gosh, I was in the middle of a bench trial just this last, a pure video bench trial, and we had a countywide internet outage. So all of the county systems' internet crashed, but it's a video trial. And so I'm sitting there trying to MacGyver together a solution. I finally wound up tethering a laptop to my cell phone so that we could continue going with trial. This wasn't a problem with the participants. This was a problem within our court-wide and our county-wide system. And sometimes, you're confronted with problems, and you have to take the time to resolve them. In terms of Zoom fatigue, I think we're all feeling Zoom fatigue, and we have to be very aware that there is a limit to just how much time jurors can sit and listen to anything in a box. And frankly, there's that same limit when they're live, but it's more, it's certainly more prevalent. It's certainly more important for us to take advantage of. One of the things that I do as a judge, and I encourage the lawyers to do this too, because during the trial, you can see the parties during voir dire. I watch the jurors to make sure that they're paying attention. And during the live trials, it's very easy to use the pin function. You can zoom in and you can make sure that they're following. Now, their eyes aren't going to be on the camera like mine are now. They're going to be down on their screen. But by doing that, you can make sure that your juror is focused and paying attention. And as a judge, I do that. I scan, and if I see somebody that's not paying attention, or if I see sort of a global, everybody's kind of, well, they just need a break, well, we take a break.
Our firm's probably done 3 remote voir dires now in various trials, and universally, we found the jurors are more comfortable in their own home. They're not hassled by going downtown and finding parking and going through security, and they're not intimidated by the courtroom and all the trappings. And I felt, and my colleagues felt, that it was easier to get them talking, expressing their true views. Talking to each other, even over Zoom, was not a difficult process. So we felt, Judge Zilli gave us only 20 minutes, but in that time we had 2 successful challenges for cause. We really felt like we knew how to use our preemptories, and we felt like we knew the jurors. We could see them closely, we could see them in their own home, we could talk to them, and I thought it was a better way to pick a jury, actually.
From the online juror registration portal from about 6,500 jurors per month. On average, approximately 60% of the jurors who respond indicate that they can be jurors from home. That means that they answer yes to 5 qualifying questions. We ask them about their ability to have a private and quiet space, their ability to have a location free from interruptions, their ability to have reliable internet, access to a device that has an embedded web camera on it, and also allows them to have the physical ability to sit through a trial if they were in their own home. So part of the thing that we wanted to analyze is, what is this concept of the digital divide? What does it really mean? And we identified that the 10% of our jurors responded that they lacked a device. Now, interestingly, when we started to gather the information, the device that we were asking them about was just a device with a web camera. So a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop, a desktop, all were sufficient in order to qualify as a juror from home. Throughout the course of our further simulations, we've realized that jurors who serve as jurors from home on smartphones or tablets are very limited in their capacity. And they don't have the same experience that jurors who are serving using a laptop or a desktop are able to experience. So we had 11% of our jurors that indicated that they had lack of reliable internet. 19% indicated that they lacked a private and quiet space. 24% indicated that they lacked the physical ability to serve as a juror, and 33% indicated that they lacked a place free from interruption. When we broke those jurors down into demographics, analyzing men and women, different race, looking at age different brackets, we realized that the digital divide, as you would expect, is real. We had more women who were responding to our online juror summons, and those women were disproportionately indicating that they lacked an environment free from interruption. Our jurors who were over the age of 75 overwhelmingly indicated that they lacked a device that was available for them to serve as a juror from home. Interestingly, however, the age bracket of 60 to 69 did not identify similar obstacles. We also identified across all 5 qualifying questions that those who identified as Hispanic or Latino reported a decreased ability to serve as a juror from home on all 5 qualifying questions. So as we continued to analyze who these individuals were, we started to evaluate how could we solve those problems. We started to identify the importance of the device that the individuals used, the importance of ensuring that we were able to provide them with a quiet and available space so that they could serve as a juror from home. So we've gathered a lot of information to try and ensure that to the extent that lawyers choose this as an option, we know how to negate some of the challenges and problems. In our courtroom and they fall asleep, or you can tell they're checking their Apple Watch, or those challenges that we experience every day. We just have to become better at experiencing and minimizing the challenges on the online setting. So the first thing that we discovered was the importance of ensuring that every juror knew how to stop the proceeding if they were unable to hear something or they were unable to see something. We always manage that physically in the courtroom. We just have to have a similar situation for online, especially when it's someone's camera freezes and they're not able to alert us that they're unable to hear or see. So we went through a series of different steps so that we could ensure that every juror could stop the proceeding if in fact they couldn't see or hear something. We also ensured that the jurors were able to identify the different views so that they could change to active speaker if they wanted to really gauge the credibility of a witness, or they wanted to watch the opening and closing just viewing the one lawyer. We also ensured that we gave access to the chat feature. In Arizona, jurors have the opportunity to ask questions. We did note an interesting change in behavior. When jurors are in person, sometimes they are a bit reluctant to ask questions. They have papers in their binders and they fill out the papers, and my bailiff walks across the courtroom and everyone is looking at them, and we watch as they complete their question and hand it to my bailiff. Online, they just privately put in a chat to me with their questions. It was a flood of questions. So we did give them access to the ability to ask questions, and I would have to say in our defamation one-day trial, we probably had 40 questions. We realized that accessibility to privately ask those questions made jurors very willing to get their questions to the judge.
Judge Chu, I want to pivot to you and ask you a similar question from your criminal trial experience. What is your best advice for your colleagues and for litigators in online jury selection?
Sure. For online jury selection, whether in Texas we call it voir dire, I think in other places we call it voir dire, but in Texas we always like to be different, I think. But for the most part, for my colleagues, I would suggest that you divide up the panel into bite-sized, manageable pieces. So for example, I had 30 panel members, and then I had a bailiff and 2 clerks check in those, and each as they were pulled in, we put them into breakout rooms and divided up each breakout room into 10 people so that my clerks and bailiff that were checking in folks and doing the audio checks and telling them how to orient their screen, they only had to deal with 10 folks as opposed to 1 by 1, 30 folks. And so that made the check-in process a lot quicker. The second thing I would probably suggest for the judicial part is go through a couple of test runs and make sure that those test runs are done with other people in your, whether it's the county or city or jurisdiction, and with people that don't know anything about court technology or anything like that. Send an example is my district clerk's office. We asked District Clerk Velvet Price if we could borrow some of her employees for the day to run a mock jury selection. And she said, sure. She selected 30 folks that had no understanding of or no experience in our court system. We sent them a mock notice, saw at 9 o'clock on the test day if they got on okay, if there's anything that we learned. And we learned a lot from the instructions about what worked, what didn't, what we thought made sense, but came off differently for them. And for the attorneys, I would suggest, number one, make sure that you do your voir dire and cast the voir dire screen. We use Zoom. Make sure you cast that onto a big screen TV or a large monitor. That way you could see facial expressions in the different boxes. I think back then, Zoom allowed up to 20 video boxes. And so the bigger the screen, the better it is. And then the second is make sure you have, whether it's an associate, another attorney, or a paralegal, or an intern, somebody there to help you manage looking at those screens. Because when you're doing during jury selection, you're just kind of focused on getting through the presentation, but you'll be missing some of the stuff from the screen, such as an eye roll from juror number 30 or something like that. So I would probably suggest those are the main things that attorneys should watch out for. One thing that I've learned too is approach this voir dire as something that is different, that is a new way of doing this jury selection. So don't think, okay, I'm going to do voir dire like how I used to do and just adapt it to the online format. That won't work. It won't be as smooth, or it won't be as effective. And also, we ran into issues. I tried to replicate that in the first minute by having everybody turn on their mics. And I realized that doesn't work because there's 30 people with audio on. And even if they're quiet, having a live audio feed would just develop or envelop the broadband feed so it pixelated and slowed down everything. So I had to mute everybody, and then only the person or the jury member that was speaking had to turn on their mic. And so that's something that I think is really important to realize when you start this endeavor.
Then our PhDs interviewed all of our participants and our jurors about that information. One of the observations of the jurors was the challenge in being able to corroborate or validate a witness's emotional reaction. So our witness was tearful. She cried in person. She cried when she was online. But the jurors who were observing her when she had a face covering on were unable to see those facial cues, that ability for them to corroborate she really is crying. This is truly authentic. This is how she is feeling based on the testimony that she's giving. Conversely, when she was online, they could see the tears coming down her face, unimpeded by a face covering. And so I think that difference was important. The other two points that I think were different between the online and the in-person is how far away the jurors were. Because when we're in person, all of my jurors can't sit in my jury box. I have to spread them out. Some are seated in the gallery, some are seated in the jury box. So the jurors who are in the gallery are quite far away from my witness stand. The plexiglass is clear, their line of sight is clear, we ensure, but they're still pretty far away from the witness, and they're only able to see from the bridge of her nose up. When you compare that to the jurors being able to see that witness in a full screen as she's testifying, if they're in a view speaker mode, they can see everything about her. Now, they did also identify the importance of her background, what was in her background as she testified. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, we're used to jurors all facing the well or all facing the witness. They don't tend to ever talk about what the other jurors are doing during the trial. During our online simulation, however, the jurors were very attentive to what the other jurors were doing during jury selection and during trial, because they were watching the other jurors as they were receiving evidence. When you watch in a sex assault case and you see that the jurors are starting to become emotional, that is, you as the judge are identifying one juror who's having that reaction. In this instance, when they're online, they're all watching each other receive evidence, and they're gaining those cues not only necessarily from the witness and the lawyers, but from each other. And it was just a unique experience and something to be attentive to.
So what are your thoughts about best practices to try to ensure that bonding does occur in this new online environment?
So thank you. Early on in the pandemic, that was one of the most significant concerns for me, because we all realize that there's that magic that happens in the jury room throughout the course of trial. The jurors decide to show up on Wednesday all wearing Hawaiian shirts, or they have potlucks back in the jury deliberation room, or they all go with each other out for karaoke. They have this bond, and it's important to them because not only is it critical to forming those relationships, that they start to evaluate opinions that other jurors might have as they near that period of deliberation. And when you have that virtual experience, the question was, can we replicate that magic? And one of our realities was, I'm not sure we can replicate that magic in person anymore. Initially, we had to have jurors spread out all over the court complex because our jury deliberation rooms were too small. They couldn't be in those small spaces anymore together. Now we've since grown and learned, and we've identified larger spaces so that we can have that bonding experience for them in in-person trials. But we do believe that it's important to have that as a critical component in virtual trials. So they need to have their own channel. In our platform, we have a virtual channel that the jurors have, which is their jury deliberation space. I don't have access to it. My staff doesn't have access to it. It's just where they hang out. And then we can upload their exhibits at the time of deliberation. But we feel that that ability to replicate that experience to the extent that we explore the use of virtual trials is a critical component.